Earning legendary commander sculptures in Rise of Kingdoms, especially the generic ones, is extremely difficult, and as a free-to-play low spender, it's even more tough. So the commanders you choose to invest in are really important. And in today's video, we're going to go over, in my opinion, the top 10 most free-to-play friendly investments and giving you pairs for each of those commanders. So if you're a free-to-play or a low spender player, looking to get the most amount of value out of all the gold heads you spend, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's start off today's video by quickly discussing what makes a commander very free to play friendly, and I think that there are 3 or 4 main things. The first thing, and this is probably the biggest thing in my opinion, is if a commander needs a lower skill investment. Generally, newer commanders need low skill investments, but that's not always the case. And the reason this is really good is because with Rise of Kingdoms, as you level up commanders, their gold sculpture cost per level will go up. For example, my show bunny power right now is 45 gold heads per skill level. However, when he was not even leveled up at all, it was 10 gold heads per level. And once you get to the last 5 skills, it costs the exact same price as every other skill you purchased before that. So it's going to cost you around 320 gold heads for the last 5 skills, whereas for around 370 gold heads for the first 3 total skills themselves, you could have basically gotten all those skills. So a cheaper commander investment is really good as a free-to-play low spender, and it allows you to save a lot of gold heads, because 370 gold heads you spend will come from the first 10 or so skill level ups, maybe I think it's around the first 15, and then the last 320 gold heads you spend to expertise a commander will come from their last 4 or 5 skill levels. So leveling up a commander with cheap skill investments is really good, and it's going to allow you to invest in more commanders and invest in the meta. The other thing you want to look for commanders are somewhat their age, but also what they're doing on the open field. Are they just damaged like Henry, for example, or are they something unique, possibly like Hermann Prime, who has debuffs and has march speed and stuff that's just going to give you all-round good field sustain and good field support? Because damage is always going to get outclassed in Rise of Kingdoms. There's always going to be a new better commander than Henry. There's always going to be a stronger commander that does more damage, takes less skill damage. That's really not that unique, but something like Hermann Prime with poison debuffs and an AoE and stuff you don't normally see too often is much more unique, and obviously is going to make him more valuable for a free-to-play player rather than investing in someone who's just pure DPS and doesn't really hold too much open field value outside of their actual damage. The final thing you really want to consider for a free-to-play commander, and this is probably not the most important but still somewhat important to a lot of players, is where the commander can be used and which commanders can be used with it. So if a commander is really generic and can pretty much be used with any commander, one example possibly is Joan Prime, they're going to be quite a free-to-play friendly commander, because even if one of their commanders becomes outdated, they don't become outdated with it. One example of this where it's not the case is Artemisia. If Boudica Prime becomes really outdated, Artemisia is going to be literally useless since she doesn't go well with any other meta commanders. So you want that diversity in a commander so they can be used with pretty much any other commander of your choice. So now that we know what makes a commander very free-to-play friendly, let's just get into the list. And this is, in my opinion, the best top 10 free-to-play commanders really in order. And coming in at number 10, we have William the First. William is probably the strongest supporting commander that's also good on the open field currently in the game. He's got an active skill AoE 1500 direct damage factor, and he also makes it so that targets cannot benefit from buffs that increase skill damage. So pretty much he nullifies, I even think, YSG's buffs and Zhu Lang's buffs, and he's really good in that regard, and he also reduces march speed in an AoE for what that is worth. There are other parts of his kit as well that also do allow your troops to gain some bonus stats. For example, here, if you have a William in your mutable and you are able to hit 2 or more targets, 5 troops, including your own troops or friendly troops, gain 50 extra rage per second and 20% defense for 3 seconds. It's a really strong supporting skill in that 4th slot, and even if you don't max this skill out, which most players don't, you're still getting an extra 150 rage out of the skill. So even at 5.551, even in this current meta, despite his age, William is still extremely valuable, and I don't think that's really going to change as we see a few more cav commanders come into the game. He's obviously not the strongest in the game, he's not the most used, but he's still certainly strong. Some standout pairings for him, you've got Nevsky and Huo Qubing really as his 2 top pairs. And then you've also got Zhang Yu as like a substitute if you don't have any of those commanders. So Williams certainly got his uses, and in my opinion, he's one of the strongest supporting commanders in the game while also being very powerful on the field, and he can get really good trades. Moving on to number 9, we have Mehmed II, and Mehmed has always been a very strong free-to-play commander, and there's been a real good reason to this. Mehmed's skill investment for what you're required to do is basically nothing. I mean, 5511 is a perfectly good Mehmed to be using on the open field, and the reason that's the case is because his museum relic, even currently, is extremely powerful, and because he's a gold key commander, it just adds to his power as well. You don't have to spend any generic gold sculptures on Mehmed, and you can still certainly run him on the open field with his 30% troop health and 10% skill damage. He's almost like a much weaker version of Zulang or a weaker version of YSG, who can be used for free with any commander of your choice, really. Mehmed with Hermann, Mehmed with Boudica, Mehmed with Nevsky, Mehmed with even Joan Prime and Scipio Africanus are all perfectly fine choices. Any commander, realistically, if you're missing another commander, you can just slap a Mehmed down with them because he's got a very strong and solid AoE, and like I showed you before, he's got the cheap skill investment, and he's got a very solid health relic. So Mehmed is a very free-to-play friendly commander, and he almost is the epitome of the best commanders for free-to-play players. When you say what's a good free-to-play commander, pretty much everyone goes to Mehmed. Obviously, not the strongest commander in the game, but because of how diverse he is and how cheap of an investment he can be, he's easily up there with some of the most powerful free-to-play commanders that you just get access to and you can kind of just use them. Now, coming in at number 8 for our free-to-play commanders, we have Gorgo, and some people might be confused as to why Gorgo is even on this list. Well, I think she's just an all-round fairly decent commander. Her active skill definitely is extremely powerful with a reduced rage cost. Her second skill is just a nice amount of stats, and it gives her opponents a massive passive debuff, which is really strong. This passive debuff is probably up there with some of the highest normal damage reductions in the game, so she's all round really good with just 5511. Obviously, I recommend going into a 5515, preferably with Gorgo, but still, she is an all-round extremely powerful commander at 5511. One thing to note though, or two things really that don't make her much higher in this list as you would have predicted, is that she is a Mightiest Governor commander. Currently, that's not the most free-to-play thing, but free-to-play players can access MGE commanders through things such as the Oratak Tavern. Yes, not all players have access to that, but it is a way to access commanders like Gorgo if you are a free-to-play. The other thing that doesn't make her the most free-to-play friendly is the fact she is a garrison commander, and that means one of her skills is completely useless, so if you do decide to go for expertise, which is an all-round, it's a fairly solid expertise, you are kind of screwed in that regard, where one of the skills is pretty much completely useless to you unless you become a garrison. But that being said, a 5511 Gorgo is very solid for the open field. 5515 is extremely good as well. If you are looking for a Gorgo pair, one other thing that also does restrict her, she does only work with Lao Che, but that's not too bad of a thing. Lao Che is one of the most powerful commanders in the game, so Gorgo is really strong in some regards. If you can get access to her, if you got a few extra gold heads to go a little bit further in her kit and get a bit lucky, then she's going to be one of the best investments you can make. But if you do get unlucky and you end up getting skills that land on this garrison one, or you can't get access to her, or you have to spend a lot to get access to her, she can be a little bit of a bad commander choice. So she's more of like a niche commander. If you can get access to her and you can use her, she's going to be really good. But if you can't and you don't have the right commanders and you don't have the amount of gold heads you need, she's probably a commander you would rather skip. Now, coming in at number 7, we have another cavalry commander on the list, and this is Huo Qubing. He is ranking a bit lower on the list because cavalry commanders right now are due for another commander, and for that reason, cavs at the moment are not the best investments. But that being said, Huo Qubing certainly won't be falling out of the meta anytime soon, and he's an overall just strong commander. I mean, all round, if you run a Huo Qubing on the open field, even at 5551, first 3 skills maxed, you're in a good position. His fourth skill is obviously fairly strong. I mean, you can get up to 30% defense and deal 20% more skill damage, but it's not 100% needed. And his second skill is very nice. He gets a nice amount of attack, actually. And when he's outside of territory, he gains a bunch of march speed. If you wanted to try and risk it, you could go 5-1-5-5, which is really difficult to do, but even then 5-5-5-1 is good. His expertise is not needed in any way. I mean, it just improves this last skill a little bit more, and he's all around just a strong commander. He's got a much cheaper active skill than most commanders. He's got normal damage, skill damage. His active skill damage is 2,700 with a 50% march speed, reduction on the opponents, and he has to be run as a primary commander, which really isn't a downside for him. There is one downside in his kit though. The way he's used on the open field can restrict you jumping through resource nodes, which means if he's your one and only march, he isn't the most powerful commander, because when you're using just one march, you're constantly jumping in and out of cities because you're able to control that march a lot more. But with Huo Qubing, you can't really do that as effectively. That being said though, if you're running him as like a 3rd to 4th march total in your Mutable, he's very solid. And his best pairings, you got Joan Prime, you've really got William as well, who can be really formidable with Huo Qubing. I've seen some crazy reports there. Zhang Yu actually isn't the worst with him, not the best, but not the worst. And then even commanders like Minamoto and Nevsky as well can work very solidly with Huo Qubing on the open field as just a good all-round cavalry mark. Coming in at number 6 for our free-to-play commanders, we have another cavalry commander, and this is Nevsky. Nevsky is just a really strong commander right now, and the reason he's not up near like the top 5 or so commanders is because I think that once again Cavs are due for another cavalry primary commander or some commander near that who will end up replacing Nevsky, very much like how Hermann Prime kind of almost replaced Boudica. So Nevsky, being an older commander, I think he's due to get a bit outclassed by some upcoming commanders, which is why I couldn't justify putting him a bit higher on the list. With that being said though, Nevsky has the strongest defense reduction in the game, with a very solid 2,300 direct damage to a single target. His second skill, ton of attack, good march speed, and a cavalry health bonus when he's out of alliance territory, and his third skill, he gains a bunch of defense, and he deals 10% more all damage and takes 5% less all damage when surrounded. These are all really good stats, not to mention his fourth skill can give him up to, I think it's around 70% or 60% skill damage, which is once again very strong, and his expertise is just a solid boost to stats. So Nevsky is one of those commanders where you can almost use him at any skill level. 5511 is good, 5551 is good, 5515 is good, and then even just straight expertise is good. Nevsky is all around really good at all those skill levels, and as a fairly generic, in a way, cavalry primary commander, he just works with anybody. He can work with Huo Qubing, he can work with a Zhang Yu, he can work with a Joan Prime, he can work with Saladin, Minamoto, William. Any commander you can really think of that is cavalry will work with Nevsky. So he's very generic in that regard. He's got a really cheap skill investment if you're willing to sacrifice a bit of his kit value. Maybe you're early to Season 3 or Season of Conquest, and he's also just an all-round very solid cavalry commander. But like I said, I couldn't really put him too high up on the board because he's a much older commander compared to a lot of the other commanders here, and also he is due to get replaced almost by upcoming commanders. That being said though, I think in the current meta, he's still definitely stronger than Huo Qubing, which is why he does get a rank above him. Now, coming in at number 5 on this list, we have, I think this is our first infantry commander, oh no, second infantry commander, and this is Scipio Africanus, or Scipio Prime. And Scipio Prime has always been one of the most solid free-to-play commanders in the game. When he first released, he was the strongest commander in the game with a massive 2,000 damage factor AoE. This is obviously not that OP right now, but it is still a very solid amount, and he's also got a health reduction of 30% to 3 troops, the highest and most powerful health reduction currently available in the game. So his active skill right off the bat is just absolutely banger, much like Nevsky, much like Boudica Prime. His second skill is also extremely strong, giving you 40% infantry attack and also 15% infantry march speed. And when you're outside of territory, you get another 10% march speed. His third skill is getting 20% infantry health when fighting troops, and whenever he does a basic attack, he has a chance to deal 500 damage, very much like Alexander the Great. And then his fourth skill is an up to 30% damage reduction whenever you take skill damage, and then also gaining a shield for yourself and 3 nearby friendly troops, damage factor of 500, and his expertise really only works with Guan, so his expertise is kind of useless. But that being said, Scipio is a very strong commander at pretty much all times. 5511, you could run a Scipio on the open field. 5551, you could use Scipio on the open field. He's a really cheap commander investment, and he gives you a lot of value with his AoE, with his health reduction, and also with his shielding effect and his all damage reduction that he gets on the fourth skill. Even if you leave this skill at level 1, it's still a 10% all damage reduction from the next skill cycle that you receive, and a 250 damage factor shield. It's extremely powerful even at level 1, and if you choose to level this up, each level you're getting 5% all damage reduction, which is actually fairly powerful. So Scipio, every single skill you invest in besides his expertise is going to be really strong. Even then, his expertise does give him 10% skill damage for what that is worth. One thing to note with Scipio Africanus is that his expertise, like I said, with the silence effect, is no longer as strong as it used to be because Guan is not really the meta anymore. But when Guan was meta, this was definitely more valuable. Currently, not really the most valuable. Most free-to-play players don't invest in Guan Yu, but back if you do have him or if you used him back in the day, Scipio Africanus' expertise definitely was stronger. Another thing we should know is that he is an older commander, and I think eventually they're going to add another commander with a similar debuff to him. So that's definitely due at some point in the near future, within the next 2 or so years. That being said, though, he's still super strong and works with a lot of infantry commanders. He works with Lao Che, probably, in my opinion, one of the strongest free-to-play marchers in the game is a Lao Che with a Scipio. He works with Guan Yu still, he works with Sargon, can even work with Gorgo in some rare situations, wouldn't recommend it, but he can work, and he can work with Tarek. So I think Scipio is one of those strong commanders who kind of works with everybody. Even commanders like Alexander the Great and Charles Martel are also very solid with him. So he's got a lot of commander usage, can work pretty much anywhere, and once again doesn't need that extremely high, basically, investment cost. 5551, 5511, all really good skill levels to leave him at if you want to run him for the open field, especially if you're early to Season of Conquest or even Season 3. Moving back into the cavalry commanders, coming in at number 4, we have Joan Prime, and Joan Prime is a very, very strong cavalry commander. In my opinion, at the moment, she's got better investment potential than Nevsky and Huo Qubing because she has AoE. AoE is probably, as you may have noticed, one of the most powerful things in the game. William is on the list probably because of his AoE. Mehmed is on the list because of his AoE. And the next couple commanders you will see pretty much all have AoE. And Scipio Prime also has AoE. AoE is a free-to-play commander, which is area of effect damage, is some of the strongest things you can get. And Joan Prime has a lot of it. Her active skill, she deals 2000 damage factor to 3 enemy troops in a fan-shaped area. Very solid amount. And she's also buffing your nearby allied troops, giving you 5% all damage and 20 rage for 3 seconds. One other thing you should also know is that Joan Prime can double trigger her active skill with her 4th skill right here, which means that she can deal 4000 direct damage factor through pretty much 6 targets within 3 turns. It's an insane amount of damage you can deal with Joan Prime, and as a secondary cavalry commander, she's by far and away the best in the game. It's like not even close. She's almost like a better version of William, although their kits are slightly different. And Joan Prime's pairings are very simple. Nevsky, Huo Qubing, Zhang Yu, any real good cavalry primary, even Justinian and Minamoto. I know there's a few weird commanders there, but they can all work with Joan Prime. She's one of the strongest commanders in that regard. She's very easy to use, and 5115 is her best free-to-play skill level. Obviously, it's difficult to get that, so what I usually recommend people do is max that first skill, and then just keep upgrading all 3 of these skills until her 4th skill is max. That's what I usually recommend, and once that's done, just stop the Joan Prime investment and you can move on to other commanders, which means you've got a cheap commander investment for the current time, and she's going to work for quite a while. And if you ever find that she's kind of lacking a little bit, you can choose to invest in some of her other skills as well, which are also strong. She's got 20% attack, 10% march speed. When she's not in territory, she gains even more march speed. She deals bonus normal damage, and her 2nd skill, she gains all damage when attacking other troops, and whenever she uses active skill, she gains even more normal damage. So she's definitely quite powerful in that regard. She can gain some good stats between her other 2 skills, but really her active skill and her 4th skill are her 2 strongest skills, which are just all around very valuable on the open field. And if you can get her at 5115, you have a really, really strong commander to use with any cavalry of your choice. Coming in at number 3 on today's list, we have Hermann Prime, and Hermann Prime is so high up for a few reasons. First of all, he's definitely the newest open field commander added to the game, which just means he's a really good investment. He's not going to get really outclassed for quite a while. And second is because he has easily got the best debuff in the game. When we look at every other commander in the game, nothing compares to an up to 135% skill damage reduction between 3 targets. When I say that, it sounds ridiculous and untrue, but it's true. He can get 45% skill damage reduction on each target that he attacks, and this is a ridiculous amount of skill damage you can deal to your opponents. It's actually a skill damage increase, I meant to say. So Hermann Prime, as one of the strongest debuffers in the game, is really powerful. He's also got an AoE on his active skill. His 2nd skill gives some of the highest archer march speed in the game, on par with that of Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus. And then his 3rd skill is just really, really good in terms of letting you do 20% more AoE skill damage, giving you a defense reduction on your current target for 2 seconds in a passive skill slot, which means it doesn't overlap with someone like Nevsky. And then also, he does take 5% more damage from Cavs, but he's able to slap back to infantry units a little bit harder. And when you're running Hermann Prime, you'll notice he's going to still do good against cavalry units because of how strong his debuffs are and how strong his active skill is. His fort skill and his expertise are not 100% necessary, and once again, they're strong. You don't really need them, but they're strong. His Mandrake route in longer fights is absolutely game-changing, and if there are a lot of Hermann Primes on the open field, you'll notice this damage reduction is going to save you tens of thousands of Sev wounds over the course of a KVK, and his expertise is difficult to really get value from, but being able to occasionally throw a double skill like Joan Prime is really strong, and because of his debuff, it can allow him to stack up the debuffs much quicker, which is obviously once again a very strong thing. So Hermann Prime, just as an archer commander, even as a primary or a secondary, is really strong, and as an investment, 5-5-1-1, so the first two skills maxed is fine. 5-5-5-1 is the best spot really as a free-to-play, maxing his first 3 skills and then leaving the Mandrake route and his expertise unmaxed because he doesn't really need them. They're nice, but he doesn't fully need them, and they're just going to leave you with a very valuable, strong debuffing and very high damage AoE archer commander. Hermann Prime's best pairings, I'd say Boudica Prime, Zulang, Henry, and Ashurbanipal. Any 4 of those commanders, if you do have them, are going to be really, really good with him. His absolute best pairing is definitely Zulang, by far and away. Now, before we get into our top 2 commanders, I would like to make some quick honorable mentions. Boudica Prime and Henry didn't make it to today's list. Boudica right now isn't the top investment in the game. She's still very strong. If you do have her, she's still really, really good, but she's just not a commander I'd currently recommend investing in unless you are an archer main or you're looking to make 2 to 3 archer marches, which most free-to-play players don't do, and Henry is just a fairly outdated Mightiest Governor commander. As for cavalry's honorable mentions is Minamoto. I would have put him in the free-to-play list if it wasn't free-to-play, because he's a really low skill investment. 5-5-1-5 is really good on him, 5-5-1-1 for KVK1 is really good, and you get value from him for like every single KVK in the game. One thing that definitely makes him not free to play though is the fact you have to spend money, but if you're willing to spend money on Moneymoto, then you'll notice that he's actually a very cheap commander investment compared to other commanders in the game like Boudica Prime, like Hermann, who you can't just buy all their gold heads for $300. Another cav commander that didn't really make the list is Zhang Yu, but I think that's just because he's really outdated. As for the infantry, there are a few commanders who didn't really make the list here. We've got Alexander the Great. He didn't make the list because of the fact he's definitely more outdated, and we've also got commanders like Tariq and Sargon, who are really, really good infantry commanders, but they're just not in the absolute meta level right now. Sargon is, in my opinion, still a very solid commander, not game-breaking, and Tariq, same thing, very solid commander, but not game-breaking in the current meta, and Guan Yu, I think, in my opinion, is probably one of the worst investments right now in terms of people are still investing in him, but he's just not really going to come back in the meta spotlight, in my opinion. He's too squishy, and his debuff, yes, is extremely strong, but for free-to-play players, you also need a commander that can trade well, and most metaballs nowadays can live without a Guan Yu, especially since more and more commanders are really beginning to counter him. Now, coming in at rank 1 and also rank 2, we do have a tie, and in my opinion, that is Zulang and also Lao Che. They're both 2 commanders that are just ridiculously strong, and I can't say they aren't tied. I can't say one is better than the other. Lao Che, probably the best infantry commander in the game, and Zulang, easily the best archer commander in the game. And when we look at their kits, it really does reflect that. I'll start off with Zulang. Zulang has a active skill damage of 2000 to 5 targets, which is really, really strong in a circular AoE, and he also makes them deal 15% less all damage for 3 seconds. It's a really, really powerful debuff to have to 5 targets. His second skill, he gets 30% archer health, one of the most valuable stats you can give to an archer commander, and they deal 5% more damage. Not to mention they also can deal an extra 500 direct damage factor whenever they're inflicted with a control effect, which they have a 50% chance to negate or shrug off. So silence, disarm, and heal immune are really, really just completely useless against the Zulang because he can shrug them off and deal extra damage to you. His third skill, you get 20% skill damage bonus with 50% attack, just really all-round solid amount of stats you can gain there. His fourth skill is a 4,500 damage 3-target AoE, and it doesn't seem like there's any reduction here, so that's really, really strong. And also he deals up to 10% increased all damage for 10 seconds, which is again very powerful, and his expertise just improves his fourth skill and allows it so you can get the cycle off a little bit quicker. So with Zulang, his best investment in my opinion, 5-5-5-1 is his best choice, but his expertise is certainly worth it. Unlike many other commanders I spoke about today, their expertises are nice but not worth it. Zulang's is certainly worth the extra gold heads because in a basically normal open field fight, you're going to be able to throw off his 4th skill, which is 4,500 direct damage factor, a lot quicker and a lot more often, which allows him to just be an all-round very powerful commander. But even if you don't want that 4th skill or his expertise, 5551 is really good. 5511, you've got a better commander than YSG, and all around he's just going to be solid at that level. Zulang, best pairings, really any archer commander, Henry, Boudica, Hermann, Shirbanipal, Nebuchadnezzar, Gilgamesh, Ramses. I could list every archer commander in the game, even YSG and Cyrus, and he's just going to be really good with them because of how powerful he is, how diverse he is, and just how strong of a commander he has really turned out to be. Now, our other commander tied for rank 1 and 2 is Lao Che. I'm sure you've heard of both these commanders. They're both the 2 strongest commanders in the game. Lao Che, infantry commander with a 5-target fan-shaped AoE with 2,250 damage factor. He's also got a 40% march speed reduction, and he deals smite damage, one of the only commanders in the game to do so. He is also really strong in terms of his stats. He has 20% infantry defense, and when he's using only infantry, he gains 20% march speed at all times and takes 20% less skill damage, which allows him to be a lot more tanky and sustainable on the open field. He also has a fairly nasty 4th skill, in which he deals 10% more normal damage, and the way smite works, that's like 10% more skill damage as well, and he also, whenever he deals smite damage, the target deals 10% less all damage for the next 3 seconds, and this also stacks up with Zulang as well. The final thing about Lao Che is his expertise is insanely strong too. Every single time he does a basic attack, he has a 25% chance to launch an extra basic attack, which means every now and again, he's going to get double rage on his turn, and is going to gain a ton of basically extra damage between those extra basic attacks, which just make him an all-round very powerful commander with a fairly quick rage cycle, even though he is in the attack tree. One thing to note about Lao Che is he can also be a cheap skill investment. 5515, in my opinion, is his best cheap investment, and 5511 is also really good. His expertise, though, like I said with Zulang, is very worth it, and both these commanders have valuable expertises, but you don't really need to go for them. But if you want to really get the full value out of Lao Che and Zulang, you will eventually get their expertise because they're both really powerful skills that give you access to a lot more of their kit and let you do a lot more damage and just do a lot more rage cycles and skill damage and debuffs on your opponent, which definitely makes them powerful. Lao Che's best pairings, unlike Zulang, is not as generic in that regard, but Scipio and Gorgo are definitely his 2 best pairings. They're really good commanders with him. Scipio double AoE together with him and Lao Che, and then Gorgo, the only other smite damage commander in the game, allows them to absolutely wreck. One honourable mention there would also be Sargon with Lao Che. He's also an extremely powerful commander who is able to just synergize really well with Lao Che, and they make a fairly strong pairing if you do have Sargon, but most players don't, and that's why he's not really within those top meta pairings. That's why you'd rather go a Scipio or a Gorgo who have more value with him and they're easier to access. So now that we've made it to the end of today's video, I know it was a little bit longer, I've been recording for like 30 minutes now, my throat is very dry, and all I want to ask you guys for my sacrifice of my vocal cords is to join the Archer Syndicate Discord. It's the best place to ask for advice, free to play, whale, whatever you are in the game, you can ask people and me any questions there, whether it be about archers, infantry, cavalry, there's always someone who's able to answer those questions even if I'm not online. So my Discord, really good place to get knowledge about commanders, knowledge about maybe even research, upgrading your city. No matter where you are in the game, it's a good place to be to ask questions, even if it's about equipment and commander investments. The link for the Discord will be in the pinned comment and also in the description, so trust me, you guys want to join it, and I hope you don't miss out on this opportunity. Now, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.